My friends, today I have a handful of deep oddities, obscurities, and lore from some favorite Nintendo 64 video games. And I realized after making this that these were all from games developed by Rare. Honestly, just peak gaming from that era. And you may be surprised by the novelty and rarity of what is contained in the video today, pun intended. So get ready to ponder a very rare banjo cutscene, or the strangest mode naturally playable in GoldenEye, and a very, very secret track in perhaps the most underappreciated, underrated Rare game. Grab a warm beverage, get comfy, and here we go.
Here we go!
Alright, this first one is a rare cutscene coming from our pal, Rare Gamer. A little while back, he tweeted the following. Did you know that Banjo Tooie features a cutscene that a majority of players have missed? Once you beat Canary Mary in Glitter Gulch Mine, you'll watch her fly out. But if you've saved this until unlocking Cloud Cuckoo Land, you'll see her uninterrupted trip to the sky. The cutscene only plays if you've reached Cloud Cuckoo Land yourself, and because most players wouldn't leave the mine and finish most of the game before beating Canary Mine on the track, it's rendered extremely obscure to witness on your file. Of course, everyone immediately asked him for video footage of this cutscene, which at first he did not have, but after an overwhelming response, he played through the game and, as we used to see on the internet, OP delivered. So basically, the way Banjo games are played is that, generally speaking, you go into each world, collect a bunch of stuff, including the puzzle piece jiggies, which are needed in certain numbers to access later worlds in the game, and the worlds generally have 10 jiggies to collect. Many of them are obtained by completing some kind of challenge or minigame. So one of the game's earlier worlds is called Glitter Gulch Mine, and one of the jiggies is obtained by freeing and then racing this character, Canary Mary. She is certainly one of the most notorious side characters in the Banjo series, as her races have truly remarkable rubber banding, which means she can always catch up to you no matter how far ahead you are, which makes them very difficult and annoying. Once you beat her for a jiggy, you can race her again. This time if you win, you're awarded some kind of scroll called a Cheeto page. And at this point, she tells you a whole bunch of stuff, including that she's flying off to the clouds, and leaves the mine altogether. And this is what that short cutscene looks like. Alright, now one of the game's later worlds is called Cloud Cuckoo Land, requiring many jiggies to unlock. End game kind of stuff. And here we get to race Canary Mary again. Kinda like how Mario 64 has Rematch with Koopa the Quick. Now normally when playing Banjo Tooie, you would, in most cases, collect most, if not all, of the jiggies and items in the earlier worlds. This would include defeating Canary Mary first on Glitter Gulch Mine, in which case we get that little cutscene of her flying out of the mine. But where does she go? Well, she did say she's flying among the clouds, so we find her later in Cloud Cuckoo Land, where we have a couple more challenges with her for some similar prizes, including perhaps the game's most notorious jiggy of all, since her race here is even far more difficult and frankly troll to complete due to all that rubber banding. However, like Rare Gamer said, if you avoid the Canary Mary race and jiggy on Glitter Gulch Mine, beat the rest of the game to Cloud Cuckoo Land, and then work your way back to Glitter Gulch Mine, you will get that uninterrupted cutscene where she flies all the way from Glitter Gulch Mine all the way to Cloud Cuckoo Land, because the game knows that you know about this final destination. And even though they programmed in an extended cutscene for this all, just in case someone was crazy enough to beat most of the game and then work their way back to defeat Canary Mary on the mine, I mean, it's really quite a remarkable and unusual cutscene. You know, when you defeat Canary Mary on Cloud Cuckoo Land, you get this sort of cutscene where she flies off. So her flying from the mine to Cloud Cuckoo Land is truly unique and rare. Now that, my friends, is just truly remarkable. Like, imagine being the first kid who experienced this in the year 2000. I genuinely wonder how many people have ever done this and seen this cutscene naturally in their own game file. It's just the kind of oddity that one could only expect someone by the name of Rare Gamer to dig up from the extreme depths of perhaps the most advanced and final one of Rare's masterpieces on the Nintendo 64. I'm still making my way through Banjo Kazooie, but perhaps someday when I've completed both games, I could work with our pal Rare Gamer on some obscure banjo facts for a future video. Until then, here's some more obscurities and oddities from other Rare games. Line Mode. GoldenEye 007's Line Mode is one of the game's strangest hidden features, and certainly one of the oddest oddities on the entire Nintendo 64. And if this is jarring to look at, I'm going to start inverting the footage so it's more black than white and easier on your visual palette. Line Mode is not unlockable through normal gameplay or the cheat menu, like with other target times and in-game cheats like invincibility or infinite ammo. But I remember reading about Line Mode back in the early 2000s, surfing the internet, reading about all the strange GameShark codes for GoldenEye. GoldenEye's weird like that. It has so many strange GameShark codes, many of which I've covered in the past. Most other N64 games do have a few GameShark codes that can do interesting stuff, but nowhere near the depth of variety that GoldenEye has, making guards giant, or textures weird, or unlocking cut and unused objects. But Line Mode is perhaps the strangest GameShark code of all. Enter it, boot any mission, and the levels become, well, lines. Sharp outlines of everything. It's like, why the heck was this put into the game in any regard? Now one might ponder, was this ever going to be an intended cheat? Well, that's hard to say. Like, maybe. GoldenEye's cheat menu has always been the source of curiosity and intrigue, with 23 unlockable cheats, but room for one more in the bottom right of this 2-column, 12-row menu. It always felt like something else could go in there. But with 20 levels and one target-timed unlockable cheat per level, and then with 3 additional unlockables for beating the final 3 stages, or at least the final stage Cradle and each bonus stage Aztec and Egypt, those of course being the Cougar Magnum for Cradle, the Moonraker Laser for Aztec, and the Golden Gun for Egypt, though they all become pretty redundant since beating Egypt Double Agent in a trivial 6 minutes gives you all guns. Well, there might be room on the menu for another unlockable cheat, but not really room in the game, per se. Like, which other level would it make any sense to give you another cheat on just for beating it? Not to mention, the developers have discussed a possible all bonds mode, where you could unlock 3D models of the previous actors to play James Bond in the movies. Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Timothy Dalton. And you could play a crazy Bond deathmatch in multiplayer. But it was ultimately scrapped because the devs were warned that, the actors, and particularly Sean Connery, might want to get paid money for his likeness, and then they would have to pay the others too, something they simply weren't financially willing or able to do, at least enough to officially put it all in the game. So the mode was there and was eventually removed just before release. As the legend goes, it was kept in until the developers played a 100 kills deathmatch in the mode and then ceremoniously removed all bonds before the game's final release. So in all likelihood, if there ever was a 24th cheat, it would have been all bonds, not line mode. So what about line mode? Could this have been like the alternative 25th cheat, a backup to all bonds, but got removed too? I don't think a developer has ever discussed this, at least not to my knowledge, and it's just such a weird thing. Many of the other GameShark cheats are simply modifiers to some value in the game. Bigger guards, bigger explosions, changing the characters, removing the loading zones, whatever the case may be. But with line mode, it's just so visually jarring and unusual. Like, why include this at all? Well, as it turns out, line mode's purpose is possibly tied to development and debugging. Rare using the wireframe views during level design to check geometry, collision, and optimization without texture distractions, which might have been fairly standard for 3D games at the N64's time. And I suppose that was just left in just as much of GoldenEye's content was, only to be found later by game sharkers and memory hackers. But then again, it makes you ponder why people haven't found line mode as an unlockable feature in other games. Maybe it was removed from all bits of the coding there, but really, who knows? People have come to speedrun with line mode on, by the way, just as a way to make speedrunning GoldenEye a little more novel after playing for thousands of hours on the more conventional main game mode. It doesn't seem to have any noticeable effects or benefits, which is probably a good thing. A runner by the name of Akadi tested this pretty extensively, though he did manage to get a Depot Agent 24 with line mode on, using the difficult roller door warp, which is pretty funny and epic, especially if the mode really was put in the game to check for line breaks and geometry and whatnot. You know, the irony of warping the roller door in a mode that was supposed to check to prevent this exact thing. There's even this pretty insane video from Perfect Ace where he's playing Jungle LTK, already a very hard level and mode, and he turns on line mode with the push button code while sitting idle, and then finishes the level. Now that is quite remarkable. Of course, one could obsess over this and try to beat every stage, every difficulty with line mode on, but I mean at some point it's just excessive. And yeah, you heard that right about push button codes. A lot of people don't know this, but on top of the in-game target time sheets and GameShark codes, GoldenEye does have push button codes. And so you can turn on various cheats while playing a level. And crazily, among common and expected things like invincibility and invisibility, line mode is one of those push button codes, which makes you think it is sort of closer to being a cheat than being just some sort of dev tool. You know, so you could be playing a stage, get to a natural pause or a place where there's no guards, and then turn on line mode with those push button codes and continue. So it's probably a good thing that it doesn't make the gameplay faster or less laggy or anything, otherwise this could be a very controversial decision that would have to be made from a speedrunning perspective. Line mode even works in multiplayer, by the way, which is something that I didn't know until recently, and I'm sure it's something very few people have ever played or pondered. Today, line mode is not much more than a retro curiosity, and the reason it was so prominently left in the game, accessible with both GameShark and push-button codes, is a tremendous oddity that I can only describe as something that deeply causes me to ponder. Does this course look familiar? Do you know what game is being played on screen? Well, what if I told you it is not Diddy Kong Racing, but rather Jet Force Gemini, with one of the least discussed, rarest unlockable features from an already under-discussed game? Jet Force Gemini, of course, is kind of like the forgotten child of the classic rare Nintendo 64 games. You play as the Jet Force, which includes 3 characters, who save the world from some evil insect invasion or whatever. I just don't recall the game being as talked about or widely loved or having as much of a community as the other rare classics of the era like Donkey Kong 64 or Perfect Dark or GoldenEye or the Banjos or of course Diddy Kong Racing. If you complete Jet Force Gemini by collecting all 860 tribals, these sort of good guy characters you need to save, and collect another couple of things, you will unlock something truly remarkable and kind of oddly unsettling in a way, at least in my opinion. Here's what a blog post on unseen64.net from the year 2008 says about it. PS3 Punk 7890 has found another interesting beta left over in Jet Force Gemini, released in 1999, a racing track from Diddy Kong Racing. This level is the Greenwood Village, and it looks almost the same as the one in DKR, apart from some missing trees and a different sky. This hidden track could have a simple explanation. Jet Force Gemini was built on an enhanced version of the DKR 3D engine, so this track was left behind when the code was ported, and it probably was even used by the rare beta testers as a test level for the racing minigames that are in Jet Force Gemini. Below you can see the leftover map in JFG, and the original one in DKR. Update, it seems that the DKR track really is in JFG. And as Andy has made us to notice, this isn't any beta stuff. I have this game and I've unlocked this Diddy Kong Racing track. Absolutely normal. You must collect all tribals and other stuff and you will unlock this Easter egg. Nothing beta. So that's pretty interesting how this blog post seemed to think that initially the track was just a beta leftover, but later realized that it was fully in the game, as a kind of Easter egg or secret unlockable. I mean, that's for a game released in 1999, this blog post was made in 2008, so like even a decade after release, how many people knew about this secret? And indeed, footage does exist of people playing this track, though none of the footage has more than a few thousand views. This clip from Le Raco Lanche, uploaded in 2011, has an interesting description where we can glean quite a bit more information on how to experience this rare course. Wander into the Big Bug Fun Club area under the guise of an ant in Jet Force Gemini, and you'll come across 2 arcade cabinets in an annex. Provided you've collected their respective chips, you'll be able to play Jeff and Barry Racing 1 and 2, 2 titles which induce a nostalgia trip back to NES classics from Rare, RC Pro-Am. Beating the other racers is simple enough with an abundance of ammunition and boosters littering the track. The real challenge is setting the high score on either cabinets by beating the default best times. You'll need to get a time under 30 seconds on JNB1 and time of under 40 seconds on JNB2, which can be extremely difficult. Once you manage to beat both machines, you'll unlock a secret track in multiplayer mode, a 3D medieval world known as Greenwood Village that was previously featured in Rare's holiday hit, Diddy Kong Racing. After scouring the web for images and video of the aforementioned track, it seems that this video may be the first bit of media showcasing the track in its entirety. Enjoy the video, I'm off to rest my analog thumb. Alright, so that's pretty remarkable stuff. In total, I found 3 videos showcasing the Greenwood Village track in Jet Force Gemini, and that's it. But first, I want to address these Jeff and Barry Racing tracks. I did find a submission table for this on Cyberscore where each track has like 3 or 4 submissions, which is pretty low. The record holder on both tracks is none other than Zweop, who viewers of this channel may recognize from the track and field 100-meter dash record. He's the one who took the record offline after the whole AGDQ 2015 Backrooms adventure. So Zweop is certainly an expert in obscure N64 minigames, and it's cool to see that he found his way here as well. Now, all this being said, there is no table for the Greenwood Village track, presumably because, well, there's no timer, and it's a multiplayer track, so it's truly just for fun with no rankability. And I just find this whole thing so surreal, because, like, Diddy Kong Racing sold about 4.8 million copies. And most people probably played through the game and played the Greenwood Village course at some point. I know not everyone unlocked Future Funland, but Greenwood Village is a little earlier on, and is something that most players would have encountered and thus have some kind of shared memory playing the course. Jet Force Gemini apparently sold around 1.1 million copies, which I find kind of hard to believe as I never had a single kid or friend tell me about the game back in the 90s and 2000s when I was growing up playing the N64 and contemporary games. But even so, this Greenwood Village bonus track is very deep content in the game. So like, how many people of the million who owned it ever unlocked and played this track in Jet Force Gemini? I'd wager it's well under 10% of the people who ever played the game, so fewer than 100,000. And honestly, it's probably even quite a bit less than that. You know, maybe it's fewer than 10,000. After all, you have to complete a very arduous game, then do some additional things, while also setting in-game records in an obscure side minigame. Then you have to find a player 2, play multiplayer, decide to do these races of all things, and realize that a new track was unlocked, the Greenwood Village track. Like, really, how many people ever experience this? How many of them remember it? How many of them are even still alive today, more than 25 years later? This Greenwood Village bonus race is just kind of like oddly unsettling in a weird way. It's something so familiar that millions of people have experienced in a way, you know, the track at least in Diddy Kong Racing, but probably only a few thousand have experienced it this way in Jet Force Gemini. It reminds me of the kinds of liminal spaces or games where no one else is online, but at an even deeper level. The sound is strange too, with no music, only environmental jungle ambiance. It makes some sense, in a way, given that the devs already own the property, design, engine, and whatnot of the Diddy Kong Racing courses, so they could easily port this into a racing game in Jet Force Gemini, but the nature of it existing and then just being this one track is just kind of odd. Please, if you ever unlocked this and played this in Jet Force Gemini, especially like when you had the game in the year 2000 as a kid, let me know in the comments. I'll be genuinely surprised if even 5 people chime in saying they've played it. But then again, maybe Jet Force Gemini was just truly some kind of insane blind spot in my life and childhood. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thanks to the Patreon supporters and channel members for all your support of my work. Stay true, my friends, and I will see you in the next stream or video.